Okay, I see there's a hand, Rod.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stander. I think just a question that I put in the chat, will Turnitin be used for our group assignments? And then the next question is, how will this then impact the similarities for the group assignments? Thank you.
Yes, Turnitin will be used for the group assignment. Remember, a group assignment is what it is exactly that, right? So your group assignment you will submit as a group. You're not submitting it 1 1 1 1 1 1 1. You are submitting the same assignment as a group. My UNISA knows that you are working as a group. There's only one place for the group to submit an assignment. So it's got nothing to do, it won't pick up intergroup plagiarism of intra-group plagiarism, but it will pick up intergroup plagiarism if you plagiarize from a different group.
Thank you very much.
Tumelo?
Good morning, colleagues, and good morning, Dr. Standard. Now, just as a follow-up question regarding submission of assignment as a group, it means the person who actually does the submission will be the nominated group leader. So in other words, if there's 5 of us in a group, it's not like all 5 people submit. It's only one nominated person who submits on behalf of the group, and whatever the mark is, it's allocated to all of us. Do I have that correct? Thanks.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I am trying to just make Prof Sambu a presenter. It is lagging a little bit. So okay, I'm sure that you are going to do your stuff on time, write in your own words, and then that you are going to act in an ethical way. But to make sure that you understand what this means, we are honored today to have Professor Viola Sambu here. She's the chair of the College Research and Ethics and Integrity Committee, and she's also the current acting advisor to the College Ethics and Integrity Committee. So Prof, I have been able to successfully make you a presenter. It doesn't look like it on my side for some other reason. It's not changing your role.
Yes, a very good morning, Dr. Stander and colleagues, students on the platform. Yes, it's true. The share button is gray on my side as well.
I am trying to upgrade you, Prof. I'm struggling today. Make a presenter. Change.
Yeah, it's active now.
Okay, perfect. Great. Okay, so Prof, over to you, and then thank you again very much for joining the students today.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Stander. Please let me know once you can see my screen.
We can see it, Prof.
Okay, thank you. Okay, students, a very good morning once again to you. I hope you are enjoying your honors week so far, all the activities that are taking place. I'm going to talk to you about principles in research, right? Ethics principles in research. I won't introduce myself further. Dr. Stander has done that, and thank you very much for that warm introduction, Dr. Stander. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? We're going to first look at ethical conduct of ourselves as researchers, what is expected of us from an ethical perspective. We're going to look at policies and procedures that we follow within the ethics space in UNISA. We're going to look at the different application forms. I know you are the honors class, but just to start introducing you to the different resources around ethics, because we hoping we will retain you and have you in our masters and doctoral studies going forward. Okay, then I'm going to briefly or at a very high level talk to you about the principles that we follow when we review applications for ethics clearance and the guidelines thereof. And then lastly, I'm going to talk to you about the application process. Again, just to start planting the seed and introducing you to how things work. Okay. Okay. The ethical conduct of researchers. It is critical, students, for researchers. You are researchers yourselves in your own right. It is therefore critical to always conduct research in accordance with appropriate ethical, legal, professional frameworks, obligations, and standards. The above includes treating research participants with dignity and respect and limiting the risks of harm. This principle, you'll see it coming through constantly throughout the presentation, because I mean, our research participants, um, our research, we wouldn't have research without them. So it's very important for us to protect them at all material times, right? So all of the above should be well articulated when that time comes, when you do your individual applications. That would most likely be when you do your master's and doctoral studies. What essentially you tell us in the application is how you're going to carry out your research, the methodologies that you're going to follow, the protocols that you're going to follow, and so on and so forth. And we then going to look at it and satisfy ourselves that it meets all the ethical protocols that have to be taken into account when one does research. Okay, so I'm going to now speak to you briefly about historical views on human participant research, right? The first quote there from Article 1 of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I'm quoting, "All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood." So again, emphasizing, the United Nations is the highest body that looks after human rights throughout the world. And it affirms that all human beings have got dignity and rights. And hence, when we approach participants and want them to participate in our research, it's very critical to respect their rights. You'll see as we proceed, we're going to speak about issues of informed consent. You know, you cannot force people to participate in your research. You have to inform them what the study is about so that they make informed decisions as to whether they want to participate in the research or not. Clinical research or investigation using controlled observation and reporting emerged in the 17th century. Participants mostly included researchers themselves and those those with close ties with them. And you know, this is where the issue of research ethics actually in this century actually then emerged, because what was happening is people were being asked to participate in a research, right? Clinical trials were being conducted on humans who were not even aware of what was happening. So again, the issue of informed consent, they were not even asked for their consent to participate in those studies. I mean, I can name, for example, the syphilis studies that began in 1932, where people, even some, had major injuries and disabilities from the clinical trials where they were not even aware of what was happening. So that's when governments became I mean, it became an area of focus, the issue of ethics in research, to say you cannot just call people to participate, especially in things like clinical trials, without their express consent for participating, and most importantly, making them aware of the risks that are involved in the study. So it's quite important when we approach potential participants. The first document that we need to share with them is what we call the participant information sheet. That is the document that contains all the information about a study that is about to be undertaken in order to inform those people, so that they can then make up their minds as to whether they want to participate in that study or not. And these are some of the pictures of the people that participated unbeknown to them in the syphilis study. And of course, I mean, we cannot run away from the issue of race. It always rears its head now and again. It so happens that it was Black people who participated in this study and suffered. Some of them suffered a major consequences, negative consequences from having participated in the study. Hence, in our policies, we speak around issues of vulnerable participants and marginalized communities, and the minute vulnerable participants are involved in a study, then it raises the risk category of that study, and those studies of a high risk nature in terms of the hierarchy within the ethics environment would then need to be reviewed by the college committee. Just to make you aware, most of our departments within the college have got their own departmental ethics review committees, and then we have the bigger college committee where again, complicated and high risk studies get reviewed, because in that particular committee you have a more experienced reviewers who are in a position to look at those complicated applications. Okay, so just at a high level, what is the role of a ethics committee? We protect the interests, rights, and welfare of research participants who volunteer to take part in scientifically sound research. Consequently, the primary responsibility of each research ethics committee member is to decide independently whether the proposed research protects the interests of participants adequately and keeps to exemplary standards in research activities. So again, as I indicated, the issue of protecting the rights of research participants is, you'll see it coming through constantly throughout this presentation. Is a very important principle. In our college, we deal mainly with humans. Of course, there is research that only that does not involve humans, your conceptual research, secondary research, but there is secondary research that would have involved humans when it was conducted initially. But in most instances, a few of our departments usually just use your World Bank data sets and those census data and so on and so forth. But in the main, we do a human or research that involves humans. Our sister colleges also do animal research, and it's important for them to also look after the rights of animals, because in our country, animals also have rights. Okay, so the research ethics governance framework that we work within, they are firstly codes and principles foundational to our decision making. So we are informed by codes and principles in our decision making as ethics committees. There are standards for review that we follow. I'm going to share briefly with you some of the principles that we rely on when we look at applications for ethics clearance. We've got national and institutional regulations. For example, the main one it currently is, it's not the main one, but it's just the new one that we're dealing with is the Protection of Personal Information Act, which came into effect in 2020. So we have to ensure that, for example, the contact details of participants are acquired in an ethical manner. Those participants have given access permission for their details to be shared. And then for that, we work through what we call a gatekeeper. A gatekeeper is then someone who has been authorized to give access to researchers. So the gatekeeper gives permission, access to they give the researcher access to participants, isn't it? So as a researcher, the minute you do research that involves an organization, you can't just go and knock on the doors of people within a company and ask them to quickly fill out your questionnaire. By way of example, you will have to get what we call gatekeeper permission from someone in a position of authority within that institution. That person is the same person that ought to then give you the contact details of those people that you would like to participate in your research. Then armed with that gatekeeper permission letter, then you can then confidently proceed to then contact those people and ask them to participate in your research. And this is after you've also secured ethics clearance. So you cannot start your research at UNISA without ethics clearance. That is one of the first stipulations in our policy on research ethics. Ethics clearance cannot be granted retrospectively. Before you embark on research, you have to apply for ethics clearance. This is very critical because now and again we do get instances where students complete their research without ethics clearance. Yesterday, we were having a workshop for supervisors. We were empowering our own supervisors who we want them to further empower you as students. And we were raising these issues that are quite critical in terms of our policies that have to be followed at all times. Then I've spoken to the issue of vulnerability. We look at that when we get applications. We look, who are the participants? Are they vulnerable? If they are vulnerable, then we would like issues of how issues of exploitation. Is there possibility of them being exploited? And any risks, then as an applicant, the applicant would need to explain to us how they are going to mitigate the risks that may accrue to the participants. Because remember, as per one of the previous slides, what we are after at the end of the day is to protect the research participants. We look at the methodologies that are followed, the procedures, and the context within which that research is conducted. And within this framework, of course, there's ethical principles, ethical requirements, statutory responsibility, as well as any special considerations that we need to take into account. Okay. So these are very important moral principles from the Belmont report of 1979, still very relevant today. These 4 moral principles are autonomy, beneficence, non-malfeasance, as well as justice. The issue of autonomy, students, talks to rights and dignity of research participants. We've already touched on this. Protect persons with diminished autonomy. It's very important. I mentioned in the previous slide the issue of vulnerable participants, for example. And in some instances, you do research that involves people who cannot give consent, isn't it? For example, if you are dealing with underage people under the age of 16 cannot give consent. In that instance, then you would need to get assent from those people. Let's say it's pupils. You would need to get assent from their guardians or parents for you to proceed and involve them in your research. The issue of the principle of beneficence, positive contribution towards the welfare of people, right? Do no harm, is the opposite of a beneficence, non-malfeasance, not to cause harm to participants or people in general, right? So we do not want our research to expose people to harm. We dealt with an application last year, and it was quite a high risk application because the conditions of the permission that the gatekeeper gave were exposing participants to potential harm. And we then had to move in a direction where the researcher and the student and the supervisor were advised to, and this was after the gatekeeper then withdrew their permission when the committee indicated that they cannot agree to some of the conditions to that permission, and they then were not happy and withdrew the permission. And luckily, the supervisor and the student were quite flexible, and they were able to change their data collection techniques and look at other data collection techniques that would reduce the risk that we saw as being very likely to accrue to the participants. The issue of justice, vulnerable subjects are not targeted for convenience. Is very important to not just target people because it's convenient to target them. For example, UNISA as an institution is quite sensitive to being approached by even internally and external people as well wanting to do their research at UNISA. So when one wants to do research at UNISA, they are required to really provide a good motivation as to why UNISA is a relevant a case study for such research to be done. Is it just that it's convenient and accessible to conduct research at UNISA? And another thing that I can mention to you to make you aware, gatekeepers also reserve their rights to not allow you to mention their names in your research reports. UNISA is one such example where they are not very amenable to their name, for example, being included in the title or within the body of a study. Excuse me, they would normally suggest that you use something along the lines of whatever at an institution of higher learning, so that they are not prejudiced by anything that may come out of your research. So all gatekeepers reserve that right to as a condition indicate that their name should not be used in research reports. Okay, all right. So we work within a regulatory and a legislative environment within the ethics space. And a UNISA, there is a policy on research ethics. And then there's the policy for master's and doctoral degrees. And then there is the policy on conducting research involving UNISA employees, students, or data. And then we have a policy on academic integrity. Now, as I was mentioning in the previous slide, if one wants to conduct a research at UNISA, you firstly apply for ethics clearance. And once all the ethical issues have been dealt with within the college level, you would get a conditional ethics approval. And it's conditional because at that point, you would not be having gatekeeper permission because now UNISA is the gatekeeper. Then what you do is you would proceed to apply for permission to the research permissions subcommittee of UNISA that then gives you permission. If they are happy with what you're proposing, they would proceed to give you permission to conduct your research at UNISA. And all of that is governed by this policy on conducting research involving UNISA employees, students, and or data. The policy on academic integrity, it's currently being revised. This policy, we're relying it a lot now, especially on the tuition side, in terms of our online exams, where we're seeing a lot of academic transgressions. But of course, academic transgressions also do take place from a research perspective, and this is the policy that then guides us in terms of how we deal with those. But we shouldn't be using it from a reactive perspective as well. It's something that yourselves as students should have in your folders as a guide to know that this is what is expected of me as a student, and if I do this or that, then it may be considered as an academic transgression. And for all transgressions, there are then ramifications, isn't it? And in some instances, those ramifications could be very severe for your own academic career. So it's very important for yourselves as students to familiarize yourselves with all these policies that are relevant to you, so that you make sure that everything that you do is in line with our policies and procedures. We have within the ethics space, again, standard operating procedures. As you may know, policies are read together with standard operating procedures. Policies are normally very broad in nature. Then you need a procedures or regulations that then interpret those policies in terms of how they are used on a day-to-day basis. We have the standard operating procedure on authority lines. This is, I explained earlier that most departments within the college have got ethics review committees. The ethics review committees report to the college committee every month, and ourselves as the college committee, I have to go and represent the college committee at the university committee every quarter and report on our activities that took place during that quarter. So those are the authority lines that we follow. The UREC reports to the Senate a committee on research and innovation. And then we've got the SOP that deals with appeals against decisions that are taken by committees. We've got the SOP on research risk assessment, very important SOP that we rely on very much to assess the risk levels of applications. I mentioned earlier that, for example, the college committee deals with higher risk applications. In terms of risk categories, we've got 4 categories. Category 1 is for studies that do not involve humans. Category 2 is for low risk studies that do involve humans. And then we've got medium risk studies, that is category 3. And then we've got high risk studies that are category 4. So it's important for one, when they, for example, put together an application for ethics clearance, to be aware of this guidelines around risk assessment, because you're going to have to do your own evaluation as to under which risk category your application falls, right? Then, but finally, as a committee, we will make also a consideration and determination as to where that application falls risk-wise. I remember in our meeting earlier this week, we had a long deliberation on one application in terms of the risk level or category of that particular risk, until as a committee a decision was taken as to which risk a category that a particular application fell in. Then we've got the standard operating a procedure on ensuring a valid institutional research ethics a register. We of course keep an ethics register that we also use to report. We report, as I indicated, to the university committee every quarter. And then we've got a SOP on ensuring the validity of research ethics approval certificates. This is also a very important SOP that we use almost on a daily basis to guide us, especially as ethics committees. This particular SOP talks to, for example, the validity that we can assign or give to a particular application. For example, if a study is considered high risk, then this SOP would guide us in terms of how much or how long the validity that we issue the certificate for should be. It normally for a level 4, it's a 1 year, and then as the applicant, you then be required to constantly provide a progress report to the committee so that the committee keeps satisfying itself that the research is being conducted within the expected ethics requirements, right? And then we've got the SOP that guides on how procedures of complaints should be carried out, and then the SOP on informed consent. Okay, just to briefly take you through the different application forms, just to make you aware. Firstly, we've got the form 1, that is the human participant research form. That is the form that one completes when they are doing research that involves human participants. We've got the form 2 that deals with secondary data analysis research. We've got the form 3, which is non-human and non-animal research form. That is where what we simply call conceptual research, where you just really consult, different literature for if you're writing a paper, for example, you just consult a literature that is already available, either on Google Scholar, or you access your articles through the UNISA library, and so on and so forth. So that is the form that you use. And then there's the progress and amendment form. I indicated in the previous slide that if a study is considered high risk, one would need to report to the committee in terms of the progress of that study. They would use the progress and amendment form. And then there are, of course, instances where the procedures of the research would have changed from how you would have originally anticipated things would happen. For example, I was looking at an amendment application this morning where the institution or the organization has changed. So, for example, that applicant had a permission from organization X to conduct research there when they originally applied, and for whatever reason they are no longer doing research at organization X. Then they have approached organization Y. Organization Y has given permission. They are armed with the gatekeeper permission letter from organization Y, and then what they would then do is to proceed and apply for that amendment to indicate that I've now changed organizations. One of the things that or one of the conditions when we grant you ethics clearance is that you would inform us if there are any significant changes that occur in your research, right? And then you use this form to inform us of such changes. And in most instances, this form is also used to what is the word that I'm looking for? Extend the validity of ethics clearance. If you recall back to the slide, I think it was the previous one on the different SOPs, that the SOP 5 on ethics certificates would, as I indicated, would guide us on the number of years of validity that we give, and this is informed by the risk level, is informed by the for example, if it's a master, it's an application for a master's study. Normally, if it's a normal low risk study, we grant 3 years. That ethics certificate is valid for 3 years, and for a low risk, a doctoral study, it's normally 5 years. Right? So for whatever reason, if data collection still continues after that validity period, you are then able to apply for an extension. Right, then I've highlighted the class application form in red because that is the form that applies to you as honors students. You have honors class projects that you undertake, isn't it? So what would happen in this regard, or in this instance, is your lecturer would normally then apply on your behalf, for that class project, a class research project that you would be undertaking. The class research projects are normally there to start exposing you to research processes as honor students, because as I indicated, we want to retain you, hopefully, and have you in our senior degrees programs, our master's programs, as well as our doctoral programs. So we have to start planting the seed now and start exposing you to research processes. So that is the class application form. This application form is also available on our online application system. Okay, just to make you aware of a few paragraphs from our UNISA policy on research ethics, as well as our policy on research involving UNISA staff or students, right? From UNISA policy on research ethics, paragraph 5.9, it says class approval, and this is the for class projects that I was talking to just now. Class approval for student research projects should be obtained in certain circumstances, right? And underlying certain circumstances. Then we go to the policy on research involving UNISA staff. Paragraph 7.7.3, it says this policy does not apply to negligible and low-risk action learning assignments intended to expose students to some operational matter in need of attention rather than for scientific publication purposes. However, the principles within relevant policies should still be adhered to. So if you are undertaking some activity in your class, your lecturer is intending to expose you to some operational matters, and you're not doing that research for scientific publication purposes, then there would be no need for you to apply for permission from the research permissions subcommittee. However, that is paragraph 7.7.4. However, the aforementioned exemptions do not apply to the usage of institutional data for scientific publication purposes. So the minute you're going to use a data for scientific publication purposes, you have to have ethics clearance as well as gatekeeper permission. Very important, very critical. Again, you cannot start your research and then come back later and apply for ethics clearance. All that has to be done before you embark on your research project. Very critical. Okay, okay, we've looked at the different forms. Yeah, so this is how it looks very briefly in terms of our new online system. Yeah, you will be happy to know that previously we were working on manual forms, and in late 2022 we moved to an online system that makes things very easy. It's very quick, and also for us as reviewers, it's quite quick for us to do our work. So these are the different forms, and this is how those forms look like on our online system. Very important supporting documents that have to be included as part of an application: quite critical. We normally turn or return or refer back applications at screening stage because some of these documents that have been listed here would be missing. So it's very important for an application to be a well completed, well thought out, and all the processes and procedures that are going to be followed during the research to be well explained. And in that way, you find that your application goes through very quickly. I mentioned yesterday in the workshop that we were in as well yesterday that, you know, the ethics it tends to be viewed, you know, in a negative light, and it's really not that complex, really. If you follow the policy and procedures and you know, provide all the necessary information that you are asked to provide under each section, and what each of those sections actually covers. It's these principles that we are talking about. For example, you'll be asked how you're going to obtain consent from your participants. You have to explain that. How are you going to, where are you going to access the contact details of the participants? Very important element in terms of POPIA, Protection of Personal Information Act. The information regulator has started issuing fines for non-compliance with provisions of POPIA. So it's very critical. All these things that we asking for in the form, it's not to make anyone's life difficult, it's to make sure that we comply with internal policies and procedures, but also with national legislation such as POPIA. You know, other departments within the college do what we call health research. In terms of the UNISA policy, it is defined what health research is, and there is the National Health Act that needs to be complied with when it comes to those studies. So this is a very highly regulated space. And it's therefore very important for us to make sure that we comply at all times. So it's quite critical then, and I applaud your department for starting to expose you to these things at this stage. You know, you not necessarily, or you may not necessarily be doing your own individual projects as yet, but it's a good thing that you start to become aware of the ethicality, you know, that has to be present, you know, as one does research. So these are some of the things that have to be there to support an application. We look at the research proposal, a risk assessment. I've spoken enough about that. You know, participant information and consent documents. I've spoken to that as well. These are critical documents that we need to look at as part of the application process, so that we can satisfy ourselves that participants will be given documents that contain all the necessary information that they need to have in order to make an informed decision as to whether they want to participate in that study or not. And we will also comment if there are typos and things like that on those documents. We will make a comment, because those documents are on the UNISA letterhead. It's a reflection on all of us if we give participants documents that have got typos and things like that. So we as ethics committees, we are here also to protect the integrity of our institution. Right. We in terms of the online system. There isn't we are talking to our colleagues, system colleagues, to look at bringing back the CV, because it helps us, especially when we look at issues of potential conflict of interest. Now and again, we see applications where people do research at organizations they work for, and in that there could be potential real or perceived conflict of interest. Gatekeeper permission, I have spoken to that. Confidentiality agreements, if you're going to be using third parties, for example, to assist you in data collection, there's a UNISA templates to use for those confidentiality agreements, with all the stipulations that have to be adhered to. The issue or the principle of confidentiality when you do research is very important. Even in the participant information sheet, we always have to assure participants of confidentiality, that the answers that they give to our questions will be kept confidential. So if you're going to then be giving that information, or if someone is going to be conducting or assisting you to carry out the research, they have to be bound by certain confidentiality provisions. Yeah, it's very important for that to be in place. For example, if you're going to be using someone to transcribe interviews for you, that person has to sign a confidentiality agreement, because they are going to be listening to everything that people would have shared with you as part of your study, isn't it? Sometimes we would require a letter from a language practitioner. There is a section in the form that asks you if you're going to be translating your data collection instrument. For example, if you dealing with communities who are not proficient in English, then you may have to consider translating your instrument into the local language. Then you would also need to attach a letter from a language practitioner confirming that that instrument has been translated adequately. Proof of registration, very important. For us to know that we are processing an application of someone who is a fully registered a student. We want to look at your data collection instruments as part of the ethics process. We have to satisfy ourselves that the questions that are being asked are not unnecessarily exposing those participants, and there are those emotion-inducing questions that could be asked, and sometimes it's important for us to ask those questions, but then you must also explain what mitigation measures you're going to put in place. For example, if you're asking someone questions, let me think of an example quickly. COVID-19. Most of us lost a lot of family members during that time. So if you're doing a study that looks at something around COVID-19, and you asking someone questions that then makes them emotional, because you're taking them back to that period. I lost my own father from COVID-19, so I may become emotional when you start asking me questions around that, right? So you must then perhaps have a psychologist or a counselor on hand who you can refer the participants to, as a mitigating measure. So remember, at the end of the day, we want to protect our participants. We want to minimize the risks, and any harm to them, beneficence and malfeasance. That's what we're trying to achieve at the end of the day. And then lastly, as a student, you sign your own application, you do all of this on the system now, and your supervisor also signs the application. And I raised in the training that I was doing yesterday how important it is for us as supervisors to make sure that we check our own students' applications before they are submitted on the system, because when we sign, there is actually a statement there that is the supervisor declaration, essentially, where we're confirming that we're happy with that application, and we giving permission for that application to be submitted. Okay, I'm going to run through, before I run out of time, of the review principles. I won't go into a detail of this. So I mean, I've spoken to you around. So I've spoken to you around the ethics principles within which we work. So those are the same principles that we then apply as we review applications. Oh, sorry. Oh, Lord. I'm very sorry about that. I'm very sorry about that. Please forgive me. I pressed something on my watch and a song started playing. Please, I apologize. Okay. Yes. So as I was saying, I've spoken to you about the framework that we rely on, and that is the very same one that we consider for ethics review. So we look at the social and scientific value, the scientific validity, and I always mention here there's always contestation around scientific validity. Fair participant selection, we look at that. There's sections in the form that ask you around inclusion as well as exclusion criteria that will inform your participant selection. Researcher competence, this is more important in high risk studies, for example, health research. Even a supervisor that supervises health research has to submit their CV so that that can be assessed as well, right? It's part of compliance with the National Health Act. Informed consent, we're going to look very closely. Firstly, there is a section where you have to explain how consent is going to be obtained, and then you would have to also include the informed consent template. Favorable risk benefit ratio. Yeah, so we always have to weigh what are the risks and what are the benefits. The risks should always not outweigh the benefits of conducting a study. The benefits should be more than the risk, and the risks, we should always have some mitigating measures in place to reduce the risks. Independent review, we've spoken to this. When we receive applications at college level, for example, all the applications are reviewed by 2 to 3 people who all have to do their own independent reviews. Sometimes it's even 4 people who review applications that we consider to be of high risk. The issue of privacy and confidentiality, I cannot emphasize this more. It's very important. But of course, there are data collection techniques like a focus groups where you cannot guarantee confidentiality, because you have literature normally says it's 6 to 8 people that must make up a focus group, because if it's too big, then you may not give everyone an equal chance to make a contribution. So it should always be a small, manageable group. So they are all sitting around the table and answering your questions in your focus group schedule. So there you have to in your a participant information sheet, make your participants aware that this is a focus group discussion. I cannot guarantee confidentiality as far as your answers because there are other participants. However, you still have to manage that information once you have it in a way that then ensures the confidentiality of those participants. There is a section in the form, it's called data management. It's a data management section where in that entire section you are being asked questions on how you're going to secure that data, because the principle of confidentiality is sacrosanct to doing research, right? We do not want, especially qualitative research. You see, with quantitative research, it's very easy to guarantee a privacy and confidentiality, because you're able to have an anonymous survey where people don't have to populate their name and what have you. They just simply respond to that survey. It's normally like a Likert scale where they just click select one of the options there, and you can never trace back the answers to anyone. Whereas with qualitative research, then it's normally recorded, and in some instances, when you start the conversation, people would introduce themselves, and it's normally there, people's names who participated. So it's then very critical for that information to be protected. We normally then ask, where will this information be kept? Who will have access to it? And so on and so forth. And it should normally be kept. If it's a physical record, it must be in a locked cabinet where only you as the researcher has got access to that cabinet. Or if it's online, it has to be in a password protected a folder on whatever cloud, or on your own on your laptop. So these are very important principles. And then, of course, in research, there's always stakeholders that we are responsible to, and other role players that we engage with during the research. So these are the review principles that guide us as we review. But it essentially talks to the principles that you as a researcher have to follow when you do research, and then you explain to us in your application how you're going to do all these things, and then we look at them when we receive your application. So all these slides talk to that, so I won't go into detail around all of this in the interest of time. Okay, okay, yeah, so that is still that. We've spoken to this. I can share the presentation with the team if you are interested in reading this in detail. But it's just a little bit more of detail onto what I've already explained to you. Okay, so lastly, we're almost at the end, because again, time is not on our side. In terms of applying for ethics clearance, it's important to familiarize ourselves with UNISA policies on research ethics, as I've already indicated. UNISA policy on conducting research involving UNISA employees, students, or data, the SOPs that I've discussed with you, And again, it's then important to be aware of the dates when your ethics committees will be meeting, and when the agendas are closing, to manage your own expectations in terms of when you can expect a feedback. I indicated we've moved to an online system. Then it's very important for one to attend a online a research ethics system training. Recently, I had a follow-up email from someone who applied for ethics clearance last year. They applied, I screened that application and gave them feedback. And they then made the changes. So all along, they're thinking the committee is busy reviewing that application, only to find that they have not clicked submit to resubmit the application on the system. And I see that a lot with a lot of applicants, making small mistakes, thinking maybe the system automatically does things that it doesn't do. So it's very important for one to, there are manuals that are available, and to attend the training. There's normally training that is scheduled throughout a quarter. So it's important for students to attend that training so that they familiarize themselves with the system. And then, of course, there's also a videos on the YouTube page of the Research Integrity Office, where you can always refer to those videos again. It's the manual in video format that would also guide you in terms of how to navigate the system. Of course, you work together with your supervisor to guide you in completing the online form, and as I indicated earlier, ensure that all the necessary documents are attached. I won't go into all of that. It's just to once an application has been considered by a committee, it can either be approved or conditionally approved, where you find that there are just a few issues that need to be attended to. Then it can be referred back. That's when there are quite extensive changes that need to be done to that particular application. That's where you find that the committee still has a lot of ethical questions around that particular application that need to be attended to by the applicant. And then it can be disapproved, and reasons have to be provided for disapproving an application, or in very unfortunate circumstances, an application does get rejected. And applications that get rejected are normally applications where they are retrospective in nature, because our policy does not allow that. So immediately when we receive a retrospective application for ethics clearance, we reject it. But there are processes, of course, that we follow before we then eventually communicate that decision to reject an application. So that is what I wanted to share with you this morning, as students. I hope I've shared a bit with you to make you aware of the ethics principles that guide you as students, as applicants, as well as us as reviewers who sit and look at your applications. And with this information, I'm hoping, as per Maya Angelou, you can then better, so that you can be able to do better. Thank you very much for lending me your ears this morning. I hope you will enjoy the rest of the Honours Week, and thank you very much once again to the team, Dr. Standa, Dr. Petri, for the opportunity to spend some time with you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. It's